I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of Assembly Committee on Judiciary to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Gilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller. Assemblywoman Wynn.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Assemblyman Wheeler. Chair Yeager.
Present. We do have a quorum. I note that Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong is here. I think she might be having some audio problems, so please mark her as present. And Assemblyman Miller is here as well, so please mark him present. Assemblyman O'Neill had to step away for a few moments, so I expect him to be joining us soon. For now, please mark Assemblyman Wheeler absent excused. I think he's going to be joining us a little bit later. And for now, please mark Assemblywoman Krasner absent from the meeting. As I said, we do have a quorum. I want to wish everyone a good morning here on day 4 of the 81st session of the Nevada Legislature. Welcome to those who are on the Zoom with us, and welcome to those who are joining us through the internet on either the legislature's webpage or the legislature's YouTube channel. Before we get started, I did want to go over just some of our very basic housekeeping rules. A lot of you know these already, but I like to repeat them just in case we have new folks on the Zoom. Make sure when you're not speaking, mute your microphone. That really helps with the feedback. And then really, there are just a couple others. First and foremost, we need to make sure we treat each other and members of the public with respect and dignity in this committee. We don't always agree on issues, but we have to make sure we're disagreeing in a way that is respectful and worthy of the legislative institution. And then for members of the public, I just wanted to inform you that because we're in this virtual Zoom world, many of us are dealing with several devices and monitors at one time to be able to participate, look at exhibits. So if we have to look away, please don't take that as a sign of disrespect or inattention. Most likely we are looking at exhibits that have been uploaded on the legislature's website because it can be pretty difficult to toggle back and forth between the Zoom screen and the other windows on the computer. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to move on to our agenda. And as all of you know, the theme of the 2021 legislative session is flexibility. And so today we have 2 items on the agenda, but unfortunately, we're going to have to reschedule the presentation from the Gaming Control Board this morning. So look for that to be on an agenda in the very near future. But the good news is we do have the Cannabis Compliance Board here with us this morning to give their presentation. I'll let the members of the committee and the public know that you can find the PDF of the presentation on the legislature's website on Nellis. And so what we'll do is we'll have them present and then we'll answer any questions. So I want to welcome Executive Director Klimas to the meeting. And Director Klimas, I know you have some other folks from your team on the meeting. And when you're ready, please go ahead with your presentation and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you at the end.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tyler Klimas. For the record, I am the Executive Director of the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to address the committee today and give an overview of the CCB and talk about how this agency was brought online over the past 12 months. I'll also talk about the agency's responsibilities and how we oversee the cannabis industry in the state and how that differs from past iterations of cannabis oversight. A couple of remarks on the history before we pull up the PowerPoint here. As I mentioned, we're a new state agency. CCB was created through Assembly Bill 533 during the 2019 legislative session. In fact, Chair, I believe that bill went through this committee on its way to passage. Cannabis oversight in Nevada has had an interesting history in its transition from the Department of Health and Human Services when medical cannabis was legalized, then to the Department of Taxation in 2017 when cannabis was legalized for recreational use. As laid out in ballot question 2 in 2016, cannabis, if legalized for recreational use, was to be regulated like alcohol in the state of Nevada. However, even in 2017, there were recommendations that an eventual creation of a single regulatory body to oversee cannabis in the state would likely be necessary at some point. The next 2 years, 2017 to 19, saw its share of issues emerge in the industry and for those that regulate it as the legal cannabis industry took off. The industry, frankly, outpaced and outnumbered the resources and capacity for what was the Marijuana Enforcement Division to appropriately handle what was fast becoming and remains today a very complicated and high-stakes industry. The need then for a new home for oversight became immediate. So Assembly Bill 533 authorized the CCB to begin as an agency on July 1st of 2020, last year. My position was authorized to start on January 1st, 6 months prior, to begin the transition of cannabis oversight responsibilities from the Department of Taxation to the Cannabis Compliance Board. The CCB was to be a new centralized standalone regulatory body to oversee the cannabis industry and work to mimic how the Nevada Gaming Control Board regulates gaming. The time frame in place gave us a very short runway to stand up this agency and fully transition oversight. When we began to lay the framework for the CCB, we immediately faced a number of challenges. We inherited a backlog of open disciplinary cases that had been untouched, some stretching back to 2018. We had a general lack of clarity on many of the ownership structures already in the industry due to minimal and sometimes non-existent background investigations. That, plus reports of bad actors and foreign nationals trying to buy influence into the industry, led to the implementation of an extended review period, halting any transactions regarding the change of ownership or sales of licenses within the industry. This review period would last for 9 months until the CCB took over in July, signifying that the proper guardrails were in place to begin moving forward again. We took over in the middle of a very public and very arduous lawsuit stemming from a competitive licensing round in 2018. Litigation that saw both sides, the state and the industry's reputation, severely tarnished. Moving forward to today, we are nearly through that list of old, outdated cases and are now operating like an efficient regulatory body should operate, issuing new complaints and filing disciplinary action, including sizable fines and license revocations, those licensees that are found not to be in compliance with the state's regulations. We have designed and created a brand new investigations division within the CCB, which I will talk about later, that focuses on in-depth background investigations and suitability determinations on those currently in and those who want to come in the Nevada cannabis industry. Business transactions, including changes of ownership and interest, are now moving forward again, albeit in a different way with more detailed requirements. Transitioning this oversight body and clearing the deck so that the state could realize a fresh start in cannabis oversight was not a small task. It was accomplished by the incredible efforts of not only the 50 individuals who make up my staff at the CCB, but with our partners at other state agencies like the Taxation Department and the Attorney General's Office. We also have an incredible 5-member board appointed by the governor, whose expertise in many of these matters has helped serve to guide this agency. So it's because of these efforts that we have a great story to tell today, and that we look forward to introducing you to the CCB and working with this committee to continue efforts to push this industry and agency forward in a responsible and effective way. I've got my incredible staff and division heads here with me, some that have expertise in cannabis stretching back to the medical days here in Nevada. So we very much look forward to any questions that you, Chair, or members of the committee have when our presentation concludes. So with that, Tiana, from my side, if you could pull up the PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and get started. Great. So let's begin with the makeup of the new Cannabis Compliance Board. The CCB is made up of 5 board members appointed by the governor. This board acts as the final decision maker for regulatory matters, discipline, and final licensing within the cannabis industry. The board is currently chaired by former Nevada Supreme Court Chief Justice Michael Douglas. The CCB staff, currently authorized at 60 FTEs, however, with a number of positions on hold for budgetary reductions, acts as the administrative arm of the CCB, performing all functions necessary to carry out oversight of the industry. I will touch on our agency functions later in this presentation. Also created in AB 533 was the Cannabis Advisory Commission. This is a 12-member commission created with 8 industry appointments to act in an advisory capacity to provide insight and non-binding recommendations on regulatory matters to the board at the request of the board and executive director. Now, as I mentioned, the CCB took over the reins of the cannabis industry 7 months ago. And with this transfer of oversight, we ushered in a new way cannabis establishments were to be regulated. We aligned our operations and our structure to adhere to the public policies laid out by the state in AB 533. That is, strict regulation of all aspects of the industry, and importance placed on protecting the public trust and confidence in a safe and well-regulated cannabis industry. We developed our mission statement and guiding principles to reflect these values, and all agency decisions and actions are run through this document. To give you an idea of some of our agency's operations and regulatory responsibilities, we regulate and oversee Nevada's 739 operational, medical, and adult use licenses. We promulgate regulations within the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Regulations, the Nccr, to guide the industry and ensure licensees remain in compliance. We audit and inspect all licensed facilities. This includes in-person audits, financial audits, and in-depth public health-focused inspection of facilities. We conduct investigations, both regulatory and criminal, and work with state and local law enforcement partners on statewide actions pertaining to cannabis-related issues. We perform in-depth background and suitability checks on new individuals and companies that are looking to be a part of this industry in our state. We collect fees and fines. We facilitate meetings of the board and the advisory commission, along with many other duties on the screen. Now I'd like to touch a little bit on the Nccr. Again, this is our core set of regulations that guide the Nevada cannabis industry. The Nccr consists of 14 sections. It is designed similar in format to that of the state's gaming regulations. You'll see a common theme as I reference gaming quite a bit in my presentation. The original set of Nccrs, this includes over 130 pages of regulations, were adopted by the board at its inaugural July 21st board meeting. The regulations have since been added to and revised, and the board will vote to adopt a second set of revisions and additions at its February board meeting later this month. Now, that point is significant because contained in the legislation creating the CCB was the recognition that the CCB must have flexibility to be able to keep up with the pace and demands of an industry like the cannabis industry in Nevada. AB 533 exempted the CCB from many of the provisions in the Nevada Administrative Procedures Act, which means the board has the ability to adopt regulations and make changes at a much more rapid pace. Again, this process was put into place to mirror almost identically that of gaming's regulatory adoption process. The Legislative Commission still has authority to request a review of any regulations that the CCB adopts before they're filed. However, our structure, a sort of hybrid, allows the board to meet the demands of regulating this industry, as evidenced by the fact that we've already made revisions and additions in just our first few months of existence. This kind of flexibility is not only necessary, but it is crucial, and it allows for this agency to remain at the forefront of industry regulations and further help us achieve and maintain a gold standard. Built into the Nccr is also the ability for any member of the public to petition the board for a regulation change. This is a tool that ensures the board remains aware and can address any issues currently happening in the cannabis industry, either from a licensee, consumer, or the general public. It's also designed to help promote transparency in the industry, as all petitions must be addressed and recognized publicly by the board. Now moving to the organization of our agency. As part of the development of the CCB, we took a hard look at the current organizational structure and made significant changes to address not only what we perceived as upcoming needs, but also what we knew that we would have to accomplish to satisfy the public policy goals. These needs naturally fit into 4 divisions of the CCB: administration and licensing, audit and inspections, investigations, and enforcement. Our administration and licensing division maintains the database of our operational and conditional licenses, our database of over 10,000 active registered agents in the cannabis industry, and is responsible for processing applications for agent cards, packaging requests, change of locations for current establishments, licensing and renewal application, and also works with local governments to ensure the appropriate local zoning and permitting has taken place before any approval. The Administration and Licensing Division also works closely with the Department of Public Safety and the FBI to conduct background checks and review background reports of applicants applying to receive a Nevada Cannabis Agent Registration Card. The next is our Audit and Inspections Division. Our Audit and Inspection Division performs in-person inspections of all cannabis facilities, including routine inspections, pre-opening inspections, facility modification approvals, and any follow-up necessary for investigations. Our facility inspectors are all registered as environmental health specialists, allowing for in-depth inspections on such things as imminent health hazards, safety of ingredients and final products, sanitation of facilities, use of equipment, and other public health matters. We also have dedicated lab inspectors in this division, tasked with examining Nevada's 10 certified testing laboratories. These lab inspectors each have decades of experience in laboratory inspection and analysis, with expertise in analytical chemistry, microbiology, and quality assurance. Finally, we have a suite of auditors whose main task is to audit inventory and tax reports submitted by our licensees to ensure what the licensee is reporting, both in sales and inventory, match up correctly with our seed-to-sale tracking system. This tracking system is what we use to have real-time insight into all licensees' operations and to ensure daily compliance and that all products are legally sourced and sold. Next is our Investigations Division, and this division is very new for cannabis oversight in the state. As I referenced at the beginning, that 2019 report of possible foreign influence, in addition to just general weaknesses in the background investigation and suitability review of current cannabis establishment owners or new owners entering the industry by purchasing existing licenses, really necessitated this wholesale change in how we perform background investigations. Early in 2020, before the CCB was fully authorized, I began working with former Gaming Control Board Chair Sandra Douglas Morgan, and we worked out an arrangement for me to essentially borrow, if you will, expertise in the form of gaming staff to help craft our new investigations division. It's a great story because that expertise eventually joined our agency full time and now leads our investigations division. Staley is here with us today. So reimagining the state's role in investigating and vetting potential licensees in the cannabis industry has allowed us to move past a lot of those initial concerns and heartburn that not only the governor had, but members of the public had regarding the issues that plagued the prior oversight body. The Investigations Division now vets all potential licensees and affiliated owners, officers, and board members. This work, which is similar to gaming, includes now conducting in-person interviews, a full suite of background and due diligence checks, and a financial analysis. Our Investigations Division reviews and processes all transfers of interest requests. These are the requests to either transfer ownership internally or to sell ownership to an outside individual or company, all of which did not exist before the CCB took over in July. The Investigations Division also reviews all management contracts and changes to officers and board members, and provides our board members with comprehensive investigative reports to help the board make its licensing decisions. Finally, we have the Enforcement Division. The Enforcement Division evaluates all complaints made against a licensed facility, including incident reports that are filed by facilities themselves. The Enforcement Division includes post-certified enforcement agents that also work with our inspectors and auditors during investigations. Per Assembly Bill 533, all disciplinary investigations are performed in conjunction with the Nevada Attorney General's Office. We have two spectacular senior deputy attorney generals assigned to the CCB, and they work with our team to review investigations and prepare disciplinary complaints when warranted. The board is the final arbiter in all disciplinary matters and has final approval regarding any settlement agreements. Civil penalties in our industry can include warnings and fines, destruction of product, suspensions, and revocations of licenses and agent cards. Our Enforcement Division also partners with local and state law enforcement on joint investigations and information sharing. So now to provide some statistics and general industry information, and again, we are happy to answer any follow-up questions on any of these numbers. As I mentioned, there are 739 total medical and recreational operational licenses statewide. Many of these licensed medical and recreational establishments are located together. We call that co-located, but owned by the same operator. The types of facilities that we license here in Nevada include cultivation facilities, production facilities, sales facilities, so dispensaries and retail facilities, independent testing laboratories, and distributor licenses. Some of the differences between medical and recreational use in Nevada that may be useful to know if any legislation comes in front of this committee. You can see on the slide, but medical patients have higher possession limits. They can purchase products with a higher THC concentration. Also, the 10% excise retail tax does not apply to medical sales at the retail level. The definition of cannabis, formally referred to as marijuana, includes any part of the plant and any products created from the cannabis plant. That includes any products manufactured in our production facilities. We do not regulate hemp or CBD products produced from hemp, which you might find in smoke shops or stores other than a cannabis sales facility. Cannabis tax collection, which is a function that is handled by the Nevada Department of Taxation. However, we do work closely with taxation on financial audits when necessary and to ensure our licensees are up to date on taxes and are remitted the appropriate amount of taxes. There are 2 excise taxes collected on cannabis sales, a 15% excise tax collected on the first wholesale transaction of cannabis products, and a 10% excise retail tax collected on the retail sale of products at retail establishments. The CCB works in conjunction with the Department of Taxation to set the fair market value of cannabis and cannabis categories every 6 months, in which that 15% wholesale excise tax is applied. Finally, I wanted to give a brief overview of the impact of COVID-19 and how the CCB worked through these challenges and how they affected the cannabis industry in our state. At the end of the day, and what still remains today during the continued crisis, is that COVID necessitated a need for flexibility, both within our agency and within the industry. The cannabis industry was considered essential and delivery services were left open at the beginning of COVID. However, retail stores were closed. This required a major pivot for many of the retail facilities throughout the state. Now, we have always allowed delivery, cannabis delivery here in Nevada, but when we moved to delivery only in those first few weeks, licensees just didn't have that infrastructure in place, like vehicles and drivers to facilitate that kind of expanded business. Thus, the CCB developed a virtual vehicle inspection process that allowed our inspectors to inspect virtually delivery vehicles and approve them to begin service in a very short amount of time. As we moved through the pandemic, we then developed a curbside pickup model. This was something that was not available to licensees before COVID and not provided for in our regulations. Our CCB agents designed this curbside model, including developing the rules and restrictions licensees would need to follow, and again, allowed for retail facilities here to pivot their operations further and meet the needs of consumers while following our strict COVID guidelines. We also lost in-person services for agent registration cards. These cards are needed to work in the industry. So the CCB developed a web-based agent registration card application that replaced the outdated paper application, allowed for a much more streamlined application process. People started to get back to work on the retail side. The CCB, similar to many other agencies, was able to issue extensions to its temporary approvals, both for delivery vehicle IDs and temporary agent cards. Those extensions are both still in effect due to the continued health crisis. So, Chair, that concludes my presentation and overview of the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. There was a lot that I covered. So, again, my staff and I are happy to answer any questions both today and at any time following this meeting. So with that, Chair, if appropriate, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Director Klimas. We appreciate that presentation. And before I get to questions, I did want to ask our Secretary if we could mark Assemblywoman Krasner present and Assemblyman O'Neill present as well. We're still marking Assemblyman Wheeler absent excused, and if he shows up before the end of the meeting, I will try to mention that on the record. So I have a number of questions, but I like to hold off on my questions and give other members a chance to ask. So I'm going to start questions with Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, and then I'll go to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions, if the chair will indulge me. Thank you so much, Director, for being here. Fascinating topic, and I think we're all aware of the changes that you've had to go through since coming on board. So thank you for that. My first question is in regards to the black market. I was just wondering if the CCB was involved in investigations or how that worked. I mean, as just a person on the street, I see advertisements like billboards that are very clear that they're not a legitimate dispensary. And so I was just wondering where the role of the CCB in investigations and of the black market. And then I have one other question.
Great. Well, thank you, Assemblywoman, and through the chair to you to answer that question. The black market, so the illicit market is what we refer is obviously a significant issue. Our resources with the CCB first focus on our state licensees and what we can do to prevent our state licensees and our state legal industry from bleeding over into the illicit market, right? And we utilize the seed to sale tracking system, and it's why our auditors and our inspectors go out there and inspect. And so I feel very comfortable that the majority of our industry is in compliance and is getting into compliance, and comfortable with our resources to be able to prevent that blurred line or that bleed over. And that's number one for us, right? But what you're talking about, and what is a significant concern, is that part of the illicit market that kind of utilizes the legal market as a shield, right? And so billboards, yes, but we see it a lot with delivery vehicles, right? So if a delivery vehicle pulls up to a house, I mean, from the outside, you don't know if that is a legal, registered with the CCB delivery vehicle or not. And sometimes it could be also tough for the consumer to understand, is this legal or illegal? With AB 533, we were authorized to hire post-certified officers. There were 4 post-certified officers in that bill. While that is still relatively small to work statewide, it is a recognition nonetheless that we will have an enforcement arm, and an enforcement arm should be part of the CCB and its makeup, similar to that of gaming, which boasts obviously hundreds of employees. But with our post division, and we have to date worked a lot with our local and state law enforcement, some of the narcotics teams, the multi-jurisdictional narcotics teams that are out there. We have a great relationship. We talk very often and work together. So utilizing local and state law enforcement as we sit here now has kind of expanded our footprint for the time being. But as we get our post division up and running, we're going to be able to now go engage on those issues like delivery drivers that are reported, and sometimes they're reported to us. And so we've got that heads up. We need those resources and that division to go out there and address that. And so hopefully that answers your question. It's absolutely something that is top of mind for us, and something we certainly look forward to expanding our reach to address as the months come along.
Thank you. And obviously it's a concern for us because we don't want to miss out on those tax dollars as well. Chair, is it okay if I ask another question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Kind of switching gears. I know just from asking around that licenses for dispensaries are on hold. I know to sort of make those folks whole that have taken a hit during the pandemic is one reason. But I was just wondering on the other licensing, like cultivation, testing, production, those other licenses, are those actively, can citizens or companies go out and go to the CCB and have those licenses, new licenses issued?
Thank you. And again, Chair, through you to the Assemblywoman. So currently, and in AB 533, the board was to promulgate regulations around new licensing rounds, and that is cultivation, production, dispensaries, every license type. That has not happened yet, and there's a reason. We're just not at a position to make a decision on opening those licensing rounds. And what I'm going to reference here, and I'll reference a lot, is that we have to first establish some baseline data. What we want to be cautious of, Assemblywoman, is supply and demand. Do we know if our market can absorb new cultivation facilities? You see it in other states like Oregon. They have this massive oversupply and not a demand, and that has caused large issues for them. Also, you would assume if we have too much supply and not enough demand, where is that product going? And it's going likely somewhere that's not in the illegal market or out of state, which is an issue in itself. So the board over the next year, I anticipate developing a licensing process or a open licensing process to receive applications. It's going to be very important that we take our time with this because of that 2018 round that's still, partly under litigation. That was an open competitive round. There were winners, there were losers, and then it fell apart, which is not uncommon in every other state. I mean, you open a licensing round, you're going to get sued, and that's just what it is so far. So again, yes, we plan to approach that. We know we've got to approach it sooner or later, but we want to get the data so we make good decisions on how many licenses we open, and we want to make sure our licensing process and how we accept those applications or those applications, if it's competitive, is appropriate and proper. So, I mean, we're going to get sued regardless. That's just the litigious industry we're in right here. But hopefully we protect ourselves and do it in the right and appropriate way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Klimas. And Director Klimas, feel free to go directly to the members when answering the questions. You don't have to go through me unless you like to do that. Some people like the formality of it, but it's not necessary in Assembly Judiciary. Before we get to the next question, I did want to advise the new members to the committee. I know some of our members from last session will remember that, as Director Klimas mentioned, Assembly Bill 533 was the legislation that enacted the Cannabis Compliance Board, and it was really based quite heavily on the structure of the Gaming Control Board, which we were going to hear from today, so that's why we put these two presentations together, but obviously being flexible, we didn't. So I think you'll notice when we hear from gaming, a lot of the same structure, with the exception that I think gaming has significantly more employees in their structure. But if you are interested, Assembly Bill 533, I think aside from the budget bills, was perhaps the longest bill of the session, weighing it at 175 pages. So if you have some free time and you want to look at that legislation, feel free to do so. I'm sure returning members probably don't want to do that, reliving last year's hearing. So thanks again. And so I have a number of questions still lined up, and I'll just kind of go through the order of how I'm going to allow members to ask so everybody knows where they are in the queue currently. Next up, we have Assemblywoman Kasama, and then we have Assemblyman Orenlicker, Assemblyman O'Neill, Assemblywoman Cohen, Assemblywoman Hanson, and I'm sure there'll be more after that. So please go ahead, Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Klimas, for that great overview. Appreciate that. My question is probably a follow-up to the lawsuit that you talked about, where we had so many licenses issued. We had the lawsuits. There was a moving around, so to speak, of the licenses. So I'm just curious. I'm looking at the, your PowerPoint here, where we currently have 739 licenses statewide for the various facilities. How many owners are there now for those? Because I know they had multiple licenses, you said. So what is the current ownership of those licenses? How many?
So, and I may pull up Steve from my staff to be sure here. So there's 232 entities that oversee the 739 licenses. Steve, are you on the line? Steve heads my administration and licensing. Steve, you probably looked at that those statistics more recent than I have. If you could provide some insight for the Assemblywoman, if that's appropriate, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. If you could just make sure to state your name before you speak so our committee secretary can note who is talking, please.
Thank you. Steve Gilbert for the record. To you, Assemblywoman. Yes, Director Klimas is correct. There's about 220 or so entities that are licensed in the state of Nevada. And there's approximately about 700 individual owners that encompass those 200 or so entities.
Okay, so 700 owners and about 220 entities.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, and before we go to the next question, I just did want to note for some of our members, some of you, I think, are sitting a little further away from your computers, probably because it's weird to see your face giant on the computer screen. But when you ask a question, if you could get a little bit closer to your computer just so the microphone can pick that up clearly, and our committee secretaries can make sure that they can transcribe accurate notes. So just make that request when you're speaking. I know it's a little odd to see your giant face on the screen. I always feel that way too. But if you could do that, it'll make life a little bit easier for our committee secretaries. So
Sorry, Chair. I think that was me. If I'm like this, is that better?
Yeah, that's better. And you know,
Okay.
I could hear you okay, but they do record the meetings, and then our poor committee secretaries have to go back and listen and transcribe. So I'll try to remind members to do that. I know it's obviously not natural getting that close to your computer and speaking. So if everyone can make that effort, and again, I'll try to remind folks as we navigate this very strange virtual world we're in right now. So I'll go next to Assemblyman Ohrenlicker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Klimas, for your presentation. My question is about the appointees to the board. You mentioned the governor appoints them. How long are their terms? Do they serve at the pleasure of the governor? So are they overlapping? When a new governor comes in, what happens? Do we get a totally new board or just a partial replacement?
Sure, thank you, Assemblyman, for that question. And boy, I'll confirm, I believe they're 5-year terms. I'll make sure that that's right. So all 5 are appointed by the governor. And the bill authorized the governor to appoint 3 initial quote unquote temporary members for a year term. That was just to help get the board up and running. And so that was the chair, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Michael Douglas, member Dennis Nylander, which, as you know, is the longest serving Gaming Control Board chair in state history, and then member Jerry Merritt. So they were the first 3. So their terms are for a year. They end on July 1st. I fully expect them to realize a full term come July, and I hope they do. And then the other 2 members, so member Dr. Brian Young and member Brianna Durrett, are on the full term, which I believe is 5 years. I'll absolutely confirm with you on that. And so also to answer your question, those terms obviously go past any change of administration if it happens that way.
Great. Let's go next to Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for excusing me for the first part of this meeting. Director Klimas, I apologize. I may have missed this because I had some issues to take care of. But you have agent cards, if I understand, out there that we're supposed to or conduct background checks to ensure that everybody from the frontline desk person to the owners are secure in our cannabis sales and productions. Have you been performing those? I think there's a backlog. How do you expect to address? I've heard there's several thousand cards that have really people have not had background checks done on them.
Sure. Thank you, Assemblyman. And there's 2 components to that. And you know, part of that was due to the transition from taxation to CCB. You know, at its face, Assemblyman, we had a 10-person in-person, walk-in window on the first floor of the Grant Sawyer building, which was tax staff. So you could walk in and get your agent card within an hour. If you didn't fill out the application right, you could go home, refill it out, and come back and get it in 3 hours. So that we were losing anyway with the transition to the CCB in July. However, we lost that much sooner in March when COVID happened, and we lost in-person services. And so right there, that set us on a mail-in payment basis, right? There was no way to make that payment, and you can't use credit cards because it's cannabis, right? And so it's not like you can do online payments yet. We're going to get there. And hopefully with some kind of federal legislation and some relaxation on the banking and financial services, we do get there. So anyway, that set us back 7 to 10 days, which is the time it takes to mail in a payment right away. We also saw over 2,000 applications a month, which was much more than we had ever seen before. So yes, a backlog was created about mid-year last year. Where we're at now is we're through that backlog, and that is all kudos to the staff. Now, you know, there's two components. So there's a temporary agent card, Assemblyman, and then there's a hard card. The temporary card, which was put in place, was to allow you as a worker to begin working immediately while you wait for the results of your background check, right? And that temporary card lasts for 45 days, let's say, until that hard card is delivered. So what's most important and what we focused on immediately was getting those temporary agent cards out, because that allows a worker to start work. Now, the hard card, that I wouldn't even call it a delay, just the time it takes naturally. I mean, that goes to the DPS, that goes to FBI, goes through DPS, comes back to the CCV, we review it, we attach it to the application, then we print your card with your picture and send it to you. And so in the news, you know, there were a couple articles about this, and I'm sure that's what you're referencing. And there was this feeling that there was a delay, or it took 2-3 months to get a hard card. And while that may have been true, that didn't prevent workers from being able to work in the industry. We hold the key with the temporary cards. We can extend those temporary cards out as long as we need to, which we have. I did talk about that in the report due to COVID. So there is no backlog on temporary cards other than the 7 to 10 days, as long as the application's filled out right, other than the 7 to 10 days it takes to make your payment. Your hard card, listen, we're kind of at the mercy of how fast the background check process works, but you know, I think we're at about 60 days right now for the hard card.
Chair, if I may follow up.
Yes, please go ahead.
Let me ask you, on the temporary cards, are you at least doing a civil name check, it's called, at least running them on the computer to ensure that they have a clear background? And have you looked for assistance, say, from the State Division of Investigation at DPS to assist you on those follow-up to get them hard cards?
Yes, and DPS, we work very close with both NDI and the Department of Public Safety, Assemblyman, and they're working to modernize their records department as well. And so they have been, you know, fantastic to work with, and we've already made some significant changes, like creating our own ORI number, I believe it's called, with the FBI, and that started to speed up the process significantly. And so we are seeing some benefits of that. As far as the temporary cards, I mean, that was put into the legislation. You know, that you know, to try to get or to allow the industry to move quickly, right? And so we follow that. As far as the temporary cards, we don't have a background check back before you get a temporary card. However, you do fill out an application. You do a picture of your ID. So there are things that you have to fill out on the application. And if you want to know a little bit more what's on that application, Steve Gilbert, who runs that, can talk to you about it. But no, there is no background check for a temporary agent card, but that's how the process is laid out.
If I may, Chair, so if I understand, a person could have a criminal record and get a temporary card and work in the industry for 45 days plus before you really determine that.
As it certainly, as the process sits now, that is correct. And Steve Gilbert, and I think it may be helpful, Steve, if you can, just very, very briefly go through what's required on the application for a temporary agent card. I think that might be helpful.
Sure. Steve Gilbert for the record to you, Assemblyman O'Neill. We require the application be filled out online through our Excel system, which is our system of record with the CCV. They enter their name, their address, some demographic information, then they submit that application to us. And then after that, we require them to go and get a fingerprint at a live scan or through a fingerprint agency such as the sheriff office if they're from out of state. That is then they prove that they were fingerprinted by submitting a fingerprint submission form to the CCV. And at that point, we know that they have been fingerprinted, and the fingerprint records should be on the way to us from DPS. At that point, we issue the temporary agent card to the applicant once they've paid their fee.
Can I ask a couple of follow-ups on that? Number one, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that not everyone with a criminal background is necessarily excluded from working in the industry. I think it's only certain offenses. But I think that the next follow-up would just be, in your experience doing these, how many times have you had that happen where somebody applies, gets a temporary card, but then they don't pass the background check and they're, essentially told they can't work anymore? Is that something that happens often, never, a few times? If you could give us a sense of that, please.
Sure. Steve Gilbert for the record to you, Chairman. It doesn't happen very often. And we follow up on the background check if the applicant has an excluded felony, which is defined in the statute as a category A felony. And if it falls into that category, then we follow up the applicant and revoke their temporary authorization at that point.
And do you know, I'm sorry, I could look at it. I just don't have it off the top of my head, but you mentioned excluded felonies being category A felonies. Is the excluded list broader than category A's, or is that the only exclusion that you're aware of?
I believe I'd have to go back and think of it. I believe it's just the category A felony. Steve Gilbert for the record to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I know I don't have that at the top of my fingertips either. I can go back and take a look. We may hear some legislation on that topic this session. I'm not sure yet. Depends how we move throughout the session. But Assemblyman O'Neill, I wanted to give you a chance if you had any other follow-ups based on the questions and answers.
No, you actually took my next question. That was it. So
Great.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. And I wanted to note, before we moved on to the next question, I did have a chance to pull up Assembly Bill 533 in all 175 pages of its glory to help answer the question that was asked by Assemblyman Licker. So in section 56 of that bill, the board members serve 4-year terms that commence on the last Monday in January. I don't see that they're staggered, but I also don't believe that all the board members were appointed at the same time. So I think in function, they probably ended up being staggered in some fashion. So if you're interested, you can look at section 56 of Assembly Bill 533 of the 2019 session. That's the actual creation of the board itself. So Director Klimas, hopefully I saved you a little bit of homework on that one.
Thank you. You did.
Great. And so we'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Director. I just have a question about licensing. What are you finding denials tend to be based on? Is there any kind of consistency with that you're seeing?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Denials, when you say licensing for establishments or facilities?
Yes.
Okay, so we haven't yet opened up a licensing round since the CCB took over on July. So no new licenses have come on board, but they had already been approved. They were in like a provisional or conditional status. So we have not yet had an actual licensing round where we take applications, we score any kind of applications, and then award either a cultivation, production, or dispensary license.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't understand it that way. Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Director Klimas. My question actually is going to broaden a little bit of what you just gave an answer to my colleague, Assemblywoman Cohen. So you haven't been doing any licenses, and there had been an issue that when you do a background check for applicants that are going to have establishments, and there had been, I guess, a problem where the background check wasn't applying to all the shareholders, no matter how small or big their share was. There became a threshold where maybe under 5% weren't being background checked, and maybe some were getting licenses. And then if we had been thorough and background checked, there maybe would have been 4 companies that would have been disqualified if the information I've been reading is correct. So going forward, have we fixed that every person, every applicant, regardless of how big their share is, will be background checked?
Great, Assemblywoman, thank you for the question. And yes, that was kind of the crux of that year. That was 2018 for the cannabis industry. But in AB 533, it provides and mandates the board to provide a regulation around waiving an ownership or a registration requirement for any ownership under 5%. And let me explain that further. The whole waiver requirement is necessary when we're talking about publicly traded companies, right? Because they can have millions of shareholders, and you as a member of the public, if you buy 2 shares of Microsoft, you are now an owner. And so it would be impossible for us to background check or have them register for an agent card if they're going to buy 2 shares, or they buy 2 shares on Tuesday and sell those shares on Wednesday, et cetera. And so the waiver requirement for those under 5% is important for that reason. However, the board, and it's an authority and what's laid out clearly in the regulations, the board can background check or demand any owner, I don't care if it's 0.0001% to register with the CCB, because what we look for, Assemblywoman, is control, right? And just because you only have 1% ownership and you're you could be making the decisions for the company, we're going to background check you. We're going to tell you that you're going to need to register. But, and so we have that power. We look for that. We look through the organizational structures. And if you want to know more information about what we do in those background investigations, Keith Staley's here, he can talk about it. But that's what we look for. We look for that control. But the waiver requirement, it has to exist to allow those big publicly traded companies to operate. And obviously we don't have the staff even necessary to try to go after single shareholders that don't have control and try to background check them. So we passed that regulation in July. It's worked. We've given waivers to date. It seems to be working. And so that's where we're at. Hopefully that answers your question, but happy to expand further on.
Yeah, it did. It helped. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. Before we go to the next question, just 2 pieces of quick business. Mr. Gilbert, if you're still on, I just wanted to ask if you could at some point formally register for the meeting. I think you got a link from our committee manager, Bonnie Huffager, just so we have your information. Obviously, we know you're on the screen, but if you get a chance, if you could formally sign up for the link, and I'll sort of remind our Zoom presenters as well. It really helps if everybody can individually register for the meeting on the legislature's website, just so we keep good records and we know how to contact you if we need to. And then for the first time this session, I want to kick it over to our very able legal counsel, Mr. Wilkinson. He did put a notation in the chat to answer one of the earlier questions, but I want to have him sort of state that for the record so we get it in the minutes. So Mr. Wilkinson, this is your 2021 Assembly Judiciary debut. Please take the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I sent in the chapter definition in NRS of excluded felony offense. And basically, as stated, it's a category A felony, but it's also 2 other felonies. There is one exclusion to that definition, though, that if the criminal offenses are more than 10 years old, then those are excluded. Or if it's an offense that involves conduct that would be something to move from arrest, prosecution, or penalty under the current law, because it was illegal under the previous law.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. And we had a little bit of trouble with the end of your audio, but I did, just so the record is clear, I wanted to note that you can find the information in the definition of excluded felony in NRS 678B.050. So that will be in our minutes. And if committee members want to take a look at that, that's where you'll find it. It is in the chat for you to view as well. I also wanted to note before we move on that I see that Assemblyman Wheeler has joined us. So, Madam Secretary, if you could mark Assemblyman Wheeler present, I would appreciate it. And welcome to the committee meeting, Assemblyman Wheeler. We heard a presentation from the Cannabis Compliance Board, and we are on questions. And just so you know, we are rescheduling the Gaming Control Board presentation. So that presentation did not happen this morning and will not happen after this presentation. So just be thinking if you have any questions for Cannabis Compliance Board. We have a few more in the queue before you, but if you have some questions, we'll get to you at an appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I think next we have Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to you, Mr. Klimas, is about diversity in the industry. I'm curious to know what your application process was at the beginning, the diversity, if you have any data on the original applicants, what did that look like? And have you had, and also diversity of the employees that are working in this industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. It's a great question. I think it's a topic that is top of mind, and we're going to talk about it probably a lot during this session and in the years to come. And we're seeing it a lot in jurisdictions outside of our state. To answer your first question, and that, you know, that application process predates me, but, you know, I'll give you my opinion. Certainly it was a component at best on the application. It was to be scored. You know, at the end of the day, you know, I think it really talked about, you know, board members or representation of diversity in minorities on those applications. But I mean, I don't think it had anything to do with ownership percentage. You know, no profit share, which is really what we're talking about when you're talking about diverse ownership. People that are actually realizing the profits, and from what I see, I mean, I don't see that anywhere on there. And so we did just, and this was also contained in AB 533, we performed the first demographic study of the industry. And we had just finished that report. Assemblywoman, I'll send it to you, and Chair, I'll send it to you as well if you need it. I just delivered it to the LCB just about a week or two ago. And you know, it looks at owners, officers, board members, and all of the employees in the industry, over 10,000, asking questions, demographic questions about race. And so the results are there. This is kind of the first step, Assemblywoman, in really realizing it. So we had almost 100% response rate from owners, officers, and board members. So there's some good insight. It's not going to be shocking to you, I'm sure, but there's good insight into the results on owners, officers, and board members. I think we got about over 5,000 of our 10,000 agent card workers responded. So like a 50% response rate. I still think it gives a picture. I don't think it's the perfect picture. But it's something, again, hadn't been done before. And you know, with diversity and equity, when we're talking about it, you know, there's no perfect way to do it, but you got to take that first step. You got to take the first step forward, and you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get it right. And so we want to do that. We want that to be a part and a component of the CCB going forward in licensing rounds. But anyway, I'll share that information with you. Again, this is something we're going to continue to build on and deliver that to the legislature, the governor, and the public, so we can make good policy decisions around diversity and equity in this industry.
Thank you, Mr. Klimas. Chair, if you could please indulge me for a follow-up question.
Yes, but 1 second, let me just make a quick request. Director Klimas, if you could send that information either to me or to Diane Thornton when you get a chance, we'll make sure we distribute that to the committee members. I think there were a number of members who were interested in seeing it. So hopefully that'll save you from having to send it to everybody.
I will send it to you. Great.
Thank you so much. And please go ahead, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Klimas, in follow-up, does your report address any strategies that you all are looking to undertake, whether they are perfect or flawed? What are those next steps? And have you all put them in writing so that we can just have something quantifiable to follow up with, to know if you all have ideas and if you're able to institute the ideas that you have?
Sure. And so we've certainly discussed it a lot internally on what are some of the opportunities to move on this quickly. It's not contained, or ideas or suggestions to increase diversity are not contained in that report, Assemblywoman. But when I went back, or when I discussed the structure of the CCB, it included that Cannabis Advisory Commission, this 12-person commission that will make regulatory recommendations. I see that as the perfect vehicle to really discuss, whether it's through creating a subcommittee of the commission or the commission itself, really talking about ways we can weave social equity into our operations and what we can do. Listen, I mean, it's not lost on me that I'm not going to be the expert, right? And I shouldn't be the expert, but what we need to do is clear the pathway. My job is going to be to ensure the resources are in place, the pathway is clear for the experts, for those who really know what it means to be marginalized or to be affected by the war on drugs. Those are the individuals that need to guide our policy and guide the state's policy. So my role, how I see it, is to just put those pieces in place, make sure those conversations are happening, and make sure the experts are the one that are making those kinds of recommendations, not me and my deputy in our office. So hopefully that helps answer your question. I'm telling you, it's going to be a big topic for now and going forward. You see it at all levels, state and federal government.
And, just by way of preview, committee, I hesitate to say things will happen for sure because this is 2021 session and nothing is certain, but I hope to be able to work on some legislation this session relating to consumption lounges, social use venues. We'll just leave it at that. And, I've had discussions with a lot of folks about how we might be able to use that bill to bring in people into the industry who were excluded initially and, have traditionally been excluded from these opportunities. So I think, as Director Klimas said, I also agree that we have a lot of work to do in this area. It's not an issue that's unique to Nevada. I think every state's sort of grappling with it, but certainly we'll try to advance some good policies this session that Assemblyman Wheeler, I think you're unmuted. So now you're muted. Thank you. We'll try to advance some of those policies, and we'll look forward to getting that report. And in my conversations with Director Klimas, I know that he shares a desire to open the industry to more folks and those who have been traditionally excluded. So hopefully, as part of this committee, we'll have a chance to do that this session. And I'm sure it's something we'll continue to work on well beyond this session of the legislature. Okay, so again, I have some questions, but I'm going to hold off for a moment to see, are there any other members that have questions? If so, just kind of show me hand raised. I think I've got, okay, I see a couple more. I've got everyone on one screen finally, so that's nice. So it looks like we had Assemblywoman Hardy. So we'll go to Assemblywoman Hardy, and then we'll go to Assemblywoman Kasama. Assemblywoman Hardy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a few questions about the enforcement. So since the formation of the compliance board, do you have any information of like how many complaints have been filed? And then if there a dollar amount of any fines that have been collected, any suspensions or revocations of licenses since the formation of the board?
Sure, thank you, Assemblywoman, and yes, and transparency and accountability is something that is crucial and so important to this agency, given where we've come from and the reputational challenges of this industry and oversight. And so complaints and disciplinary matters were never really, certainly they would go maybe in front of the tax commission, right, for final approval on a settlement. Nobody ever really knew if they were happening, and they were to some degree, right, but it was all kind of behind closed doors. And so I say that because on our website, and I'll talk about it, but on our website, all complaints are listed. All settlements are listed, all dispositions, everything is out in the open, and it's the purpose and the point of the CCB. So I preface what I'll say with that, but yes, at the first board meeting, for example, the very first board meeting in July, we issued I believe it was a $1.25 million fine to a licensee that had 14 licenses and revoked 6 out of those 14 licenses due to some fairly egregious actions that were going on at those facilities. Since then, we've had a number of complaints, a number of different fines that vary in different levels. They're all online. As soon as the board approves the issuance of a complaint, it is published online, the complaint in its entirety. When that complaint is resolved, whether through settlement or a hearing with the administrative law judge, that disposition is also posted online as soon as it happens. And so we've just really tried to maintain and bring that out into the public, given kind of where we came from in the past.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and certainly appreciate the transparency piece. I think, you know, we all in all areas really like transparency, and so I appreciate that they are on that and posting those things so that the public is aware. And so thank you for those answers.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Clemens. Chair Yeager, can you hear me better? I put in earphones. Does that help? Can everybody hear me better?
I can hear you just fine, and I'll just I'll ask my committee manager to let me know by chat if she can't, but I can hear you fine, so please go ahead.
Trying to figure out the best way to do this. So this is just kind of a background information for me. I noticed that the CBD products and the hemp are not controlled by the board. Are those things that should be under the board, or you're satisfied that they're not under control? It's fine. Like one is Department of Agriculture, and you know, one is health departments. You know, it's part of the plan. Should all be under one jurisdiction, or just curious about the history of that. Why it's not?
Sure. The history on why it's not. I mean, you know, I think it's just what industries they touch on. So like hemp is really agriculture based. I don't know why you know, it's I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't know what the mechanics were, but it makes sense that hemp is under the Department of Agriculture. CBD is this you know, product that's contained in lotions and things like that, and it's not really regulated at the federal well, it's not regulated at the federal level, and I don't know how it's regulated at the state level either. And I know my staff is cringing as I talk about this. As far as keeping them all under one tent, I mean, they're just so very different. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of confusion. You know, it's easy to lump them all in together, and that's just not the case. There's just so many differences. But you know, lumping them all under one would be a beast of an agency because of the intricacies. I think Department of Agriculture does a great job regulating hemp. They've promulgated, I know, a ton of regulations after hemp was legalized at the federal level. And we work very closely with the Department of Agriculture. You know, like our testing laboratories have play in all three of those things. So there's natural crossover. I think the elephant in the room is the CBD, which I imagine is probably going to be a topic for this legislative session as well. I believe it was in 2019, but that is just a interesting gray area with the fact that there's state CBD or CBD developed in the state and CBD from outside of the state in other countries that can be purchased, you know, and you can get it delivered by Amazon tomorrow. Who regulated what's in there? You know, we don't know. But I certainly support a good home and regulatory body that would oversee CBD, and certainly we'd have some kind of connection to that. Sorry if that wasn't a great answer for you, but if you want to know the mechanics and more about the composition of CBD and hemp, Kara Cronkite from my staff would be happy right now to talk through that if you have any follow-up questions.
No, I think that gives a good overview. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, I see Assemblyman O'Neill. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Director, just getting back to a little bit on, you're talking about the testing. What labs? Do we have local labs? Who's controlling the labs that are doing your testing? Or is it up to each delivery agency or to do their own testing?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman. So there are 10 licensed testing facilities for cannabis in the state. Assemblyman, we license them just like we license any other license types. There are some restrictions, right? So they can't also have ownership in a facility if they run a lab. But we license them, we audit them, we inspect them just like our other facilities. And I had mentioned we've got a small but mighty team of lab inspectors who are incredible. I think some of the best in the nation. And I have to tell you, some of our lab regulations are some of the most extensive in the nation. You know, you see other jurisdictions when things get difficult or, you know, certain instances of I don't know, chemicals or come up, they stop testing for it as an answer. We've never done that in Nevada. We take it very seriously. We consider labs as the gatekeepers of the industry. I talk about it a lot. And they are the protector of the health and safety of consumers, both medically and recreationally. They are the ones that ensure that that product is safe. And so if I could have an entire lab division, I would love, and I hope I have it one day. But yes, they are licensed just like any other establishment by the CCB.
If I may, Chair, follow up.
Please go ahead.
DPS is talking about building a state forensic laboratory. You'll be part of that. You'll give up these private labs and you'll just utilize the DPS lab. Is that correct then, or is that fair to say?
So not exactly. And so what the state lab is going to allow us to do is going to be on inspections and investigations. The independent labs will always exist because they test product and they test massive amounts of product every day, right? That's their business model, and there's 10 of them. What we need the state lab for, is to ensure that they're testing correctly, right? So if let's say, you know, we do an inspection and we see that they're not performing tests up to their standard operating procedures, or they're cutting corners, or something's wrong, certainly we can watch their process, we can critique their process from that, but if we want to know if they're passing product that shouldn't be passed, or they're saying that there's not mold or yeast, but there is mold or yeast, obviously we can't confirm that unless we test it. But because we don't have a state lab, our only option then, and we exercise this option a lot, is to send that then to another one of the 10 labs to get it tested. So they're testing one of their other labs, essentially a competitor's test. And so we do secondary and tertiary testing. So then we send it to a third lab just to ensure that it's impartial, to be able to check their results. Same thing if we were to go to a dispensary and do a spot check on product, which we do. We have to send that to one of our state licensed labs. They see the product, they know where that product's come from. It works. We're able to retest and test, and we get those results. But having a state lab, so we have our chemists, our processes that we can take any product, send it to our lab, and we know exactly, you know, what that product should have contained, if it should have passed or failed, and it's our people are the ones that are confirming those kinds of results. Hopefully that makes sense or clarifies it. I know Director Tagliati talked a little bit about it in the committee yesterday.
I will say, Director, it clarifies. It sort of concerns me that a competitor is testing another laboratory and we're not utilizing the various labs that we have now with the Washoe Sheriff's Office, Henderson, or Las Vegas Metro. And I feel for you. I'll look forward to having the state have their lab and to confirm, and we can confirm that our cannabis is as reported and you're being fully supported.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And I would just add, I participate on a quarterly lab call with all of the local labs, and it's not that we don't send, it's just they can't test for what we test for. And it's the same with Department of Agriculture does have a lab, but they don't test or they at least don't test for all the components that we test for. Heavy metals, aspergillus, yeast, and mold. It's not just about THC content, or at some of the local labs, and it's either cannabis or it's not cannabis, right? That's not the test we're looking for. We're really trying to get down to the granular level on that, and the capacity, they couldn't do it if they wanted to, and they know that, and they support us as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions from committee members? Okay, I'm going to take a chance to ask a couple. Committee, again, I think I had like 8 questions and you all asked like 6 of them. So that makes me feel like we're on the same page. I appreciate that. Director Klimas, I think my questions will be pretty easy. The first one was just on the advisory committee that you noted in your presentation. I just wanted to ask for an update on the formation of the advisory committee. Is it up and running? If not, when do we expect it to be up and running, to the extent you know the answer to that?
Sure. So I think we're very, very close. First order of business was to stand up the board. Obviously, 8 gubernatorial appointments on a 12-member commission takes a little bit more time, but I think we're very, very close here, and we'll see it in the very near future, that roster filled out. As far as meetings, obviously, we're right in the middle of session. Same kind of staff, you know, my staff that staffs the board, staffs the commission as well, and so, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I think it will be up and running very, very soon.
Thank you. And then the other question, I just want to ask maybe a clarifying question, because I think there's always some confusion around this, particularly in Southern Nevada, and that is delivery of cannabis products. And I could be mistaken about this, but I have some recollection that after the pandemic started, that if delivery wasn't allowed, then it was allowed, you know, to incentivize people not to be going out and congregating at businesses. And so if you could just on a high level, let me know what is allowed in the delivery space, who's allowed to do those deliveries versus I think we heard earlier about, you know, black market activity versus, you know, what's the current status of who is not allowed, or are dispensaries allowed to contract with third-party delivery services, or do they have to have their own delivery? Just that sort of thing at a high level, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. And Kara from my team, get ready here. Delivery has always been allowed in Nevada. The COVID-19 obviously pushed all sales to delivery. We talked about the process we did to virtually inspect vehicles to get them out on the road, which we did. We got a number, I mean, in the first weekend alone, Chair, 150 vehicles were sent in for approval. Our staff worked all weekend to approve those virtually. I think over 900 was the final number within like the first 5-6 weeks. We implemented curbside, and so delivery, you know, certainly was reduced quite a bit. But Kara from my team, she is the head of audit and inspection. She can talk about how dispensaries utilize delivery drivers and how they apply and how they're registered. So Kara, if you're on, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Klimas. Yes, we do allow for third-party delivery. They have to be contracted with the dispensary directly. They have to hold agent cards for the dispensary that they are delivering for. There is a list available on our website of all the dispensaries that offer delivery, as well as any third-party companies that they contract with. I believe as of COVID, every dispensary is now offering delivery because that was a requirement, and it has been successful for the industry during this time. The process involves the delivery vehicle, like a video of the delivery vehicle. They show that it has an alarm, that there's a lock box that is tethered to the vehicle. Usually they physically drill them into the vehicle. And it has a lot of requirements as to visibility of product. You know, that's not allowed. They can't have anything on the vehicle itself that would give any indication that there is cannabis inside of the vehicle, and as well as being limited to 5 ounces of cannabis or equivalent per delivery. And if you have any additional questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. And just for the record, for our committee secretary, that was Kara Cronkite. Hope I got your last name right, speaking. Yes. I think I just have one more. Hopefully this isn't too out there, Director Klimas, but you know, I'm under the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, but dispensaries are allowed to sell product either, you know, on the internet through an app. Obviously you have to be in Nevada, you got to show them your ID, all that kind of stuff. But I just wondered, you know, what is the current status of allowing, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but, you know, sort of third parties who are not directly involved in the sale of the cannabis, listing cannabis dispensaries and facilitating orders. You know, I'm thinking of like an Expedia website, right? Which they don't fly anywhere, but you can purchase tickets through existing airlines on their website. Is that kind of arrangement allowed in Nevada currently, or is a requirement that the dispensary itself is really the only one who can sell product directly to the consumer? And I hope that's clear. If not, just let me know and I'll try to rephrase it.
Thank you, Chair, and it's clear. And I'll have actually Kara again explain a little bit about that. We've talked a lot about it. There's different companies out there that have applied and asked to be able to use their services like that. You know, just a little bit of history and why we have to approach this with caution is that some of these third-party platforms, you know, used to not only advertise legal product, but they advertised illegal product, you know, and some of them used to be, you know, the Craigslist for, you know, illegal product. And I think we're moving away from that as far as third-party platforms, but it is something that we approach with caution. It does exist. And Kara, if you could talk a little bit about those kind of third-party platforms, that would be helpful.
Yes, Kara Cronkite for the record. Good morning, Chair. Yeah, we have a regulation in place in the NCCRs that states that third-party platforms are not allowed to directly sell the products. So if the sale is advertised through the third-party platform, the sale has to actually be completed through the dispensary directly. And so what you'll see frequently is a website that has several different products from several different dispensaries on their website. But when you click on a product to order it, it would link you directly to the dispensary's website to place the order through them and through their POS system.
Thank you. That makes sense and answers the question. That's all the questions I have. Last call for committee members. Any further questions? I'm seeing heads shaking no, so I think that means Director Klimas, you and your staff are off the hook. Appreciate you being here this morning and presenting on the Cannabis Compliance Board, and I'm sure we'll be working with you as we receive cannabis bills in the committee and process those. And, you know, if we can be of assistance or you or your staff have concerns, feel free, of course, to reach out to me or other committee members directly.
Thank you, Chair and committee. Thank you. It was great to be here. Look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Great. Have a nice day. Okay, committee. So that is the end of our presentations on the agenda. We are going to go at this point to our public comment line. As I've indicated, we are going to reserve up to 30 minutes for public comment at the end of each meeting. Each caller on the public comment line will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. So BPS, if you could let me know if there's anybody in the public comment line, and if so, if you could please queue up the first caller.
Yes, Chair, we have one caller. Would the caller with the last 3 digits, 107, please state your name and slowly spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead. Just state your name first.
Good morning. My name is Mona Lisa Samuelson. That's MONALISA and I represent the medical cannabis patients who live here in Nevada. Patients are very grateful for the Cannabis Compliance Board for their work to keep a brand new, booming, cash-only industry in line. As we watch the CCB as a commission unfold, we appreciate the complexity of the work involved. But medical patients are still having to beg for our consumer safety because until testing standards and testing methodologies are overseen by the proper channels of oversight, we've been let completely down by the CCB and the LCB. Now, let me make this very clear for the record. Medical cannabis patients are still begging for legislative help in creating the proper laboratory testing oversight that would reflect actual consumer safety for Nevada's cannabis products. It's important this committee understand that testing standards were set by the lab owners and profit margins were very much
Chair, it sounds like we got disconnected from the caller. I'll wait to see if she calls back in.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's give her a couple minutes to see if she can call back in and give her the opportunity to finish her public comments. So just let me know if and when that happens. BPS, has she had a chance to call back in yet?
Chair, she has not called back in. At this time, our public comment line is open and working, and we don't have any more callers.
Great, thank you so much. And Ms. Samuelson, if you can hear me, thank you for being here. I know you've testified on these issues for a long time, and feel free to provide the rest of your comment in writing if you would, and I'll make sure that the committee members receive that, as you weren't able to finish that public comment. So at this time, we'll close public comment for today's meeting. Before the announcements, anything else from any of our committee members? It's nice to see you all on one screen finally. Yesterday, there were several screens and it was difficult to see everybody. Okay, I don't see anything else from our committee members, so let's just talk about the rest of this week. As you know, we do not have a Judiciary Committee meeting tomorrow, so particularly for our new members, pat yourself on the back. You've gotten through your first week of Assembly Judiciary Committee. Things are probably going to start ramping up a little more the next few weeks. As I noted before, this committee is typically extremely busy. So as for next week, as I indicated, we do have a meeting on Monday and it will start at 8 o'clock. We have 3 or 4 presentations focused mostly on law enforcement and then our court systems here in down in the 8th Judicial District Court in Las Vegas and the 2nd Judicial District Court up in Washoe County. And then we're working on agendas for the rest of the week. As of this point, I do anticipate we'll have meetings Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll have some presentations in those meetings, and I am crossing my fingers that we can start hearing some bills here pretty soon as well. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I do want to remind folks that you should be getting bills coming to you in the next couple weeks, hopefully, and please make sure you stay on top of those. You sign those and get them turned into the front desk, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose those bills. So I think that's everything for today. Again, I want to thank committee members. I think we had a pretty good first week given this new technology that we're dealing with, and thank everyone for your patience as we kind of work through this. And so everyone have a wonderful day. Enjoy your Friday morning off. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all in this committee on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bye, everyone.